This recording is part of the recordings that cover an introduction to the nervous system. This one will specifically do an overview of protection of the CNS, as well as looking at one of the specific protections is looking at the role of the meninges in protection of the central nervous system. Other recordings will cover some of the other ways that we protect the central nervous system. So first thing we'll look at is, I just love that picture. So here's a brain. Now obviously, thankfully, it's not, we have our skull there because this would not provide a huge amount of protection. So there are different means that we protect the central nervous system. So one of the things we have is bone. So bone is hard. It's very durable. So the central nervous system is protected by what we refer to as your axial skeleton. Your axial skeleton includes your skull, which protects the brain, and you see the vertebra here, which will protect the spinal cord. So it's tough. It helps protect it. We know it's not 100% protective because we've had skull fractures, fractures of the vertebra, but it does provide me just kind of bumping my head against the wall. I'm not suffering any brain injury because that bone's pretty tough. So you have bone. You also have some adipose tissue that helps in protection, but it's only associated with the spinal cord. So here's a section, cross-section of the spinal cord, and you're seeing some of the vertebra right here. And you'll see right around here, you see adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is actually part of, and I might as well write it down now, it's found in the epidural space in the spinal cord, and it helps to kind of act as like a little bit of a shock absorber, a little cushion. So we have adipose tissue there. We don't have that up in the brain. Another means we have are the meninges. So those are what we're going to be talking about more in depth after I do this introduction. So meninges are membrane coverings. They're tough, they're flexible. They're going to be important means of protecting the brain. We'll also discuss at a later date looking at cerebral spinal fluid. So cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, we abbreviate it, is a liquid cushion. It's going to have a number of different functions. We'll cover that later. And then we also have the blood-brain barrier. So we'll look at that in other recordings. So let's look at the role of the meninges. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to keep coming back to this, is I'm going to just write just words, and I'll always keep coming back to this. So I'm going to start a little story. So meninx is the singular form of meninges. So this is singular for one. Plural is meninges. They mean membranes. Well, they believed way back in the day that the meninges were the mother of all membranes. And a German word for mother is Mater. So the names of the meninges all have Mater as part of them. So the outermost is called the Dura Mater. Some people will say Dura Mater. I don't care if you say that, but just remember there's only one T in there. It's not M-A-T-T-E-R, it's one. Dura Mater literally means tough mother, because Dura, something's durable, it's tough. It's the toughest of all of them. That is the outermost. The middle one is referred to as the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid mater. Arachnoid is a word that refers to like spider, web-like. So because of how it looks, it's very web-like, they call it the arachnoid mater. The innermost is called the pia mater. Pia means soft, it's delicate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one of them. We're going to start with the meninges in the brain, the cranial meninges, and then we'll look at the spinal meninges. The names are still the same. You still have dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. You see, notice I go back and forth between mater and mater. These membranes are fibroelastic connective tissues. They have mesothelium, that's the epithelium of it. They're very well vascularized, and they've got, you know, this dense collagenous connective tissue. So it's got epithelial tissue, it's actually mesothelium, and it has these kind of fibroelastic, collagen-y-like connective tissue. So these are membranes. So we're going to start with the dura mater. So this is the most superficial of all the meninges. So here on this coronal section through the skull, you see the bone here, and in the green, this represents your dura mater. Okay? The dura mater actually has two components to it. The outer part is connected right up here to the inner periosteum of your skull, and the innermost layer surrounds and supports these structures that you see here called dural sinuses, which are, it's filled with venous blood, deoxygenated blood. That venous blood collects blood from the brain. So you have kind of two layers to it here. Now, above the epidural, or sorry, above the dura mater, right up here. Okay, I'm just going to let's do yellow, right here. They refer to that as the epidural space, because epi means upon. It's upon the dura mater. So I'm going to come back here because I told you I'm going to keep coming back to this. So epidural space is above the dura mater. Well, up there in the brain, that is a potential, I'm going to use this term in quotes, potential space. It should not, under normal conditions, be there, but it potentially can become a space because of the pressure created by cerebrospinal fluid. This is going to be, the dura mater is going to be pretty much firmly attached up here to the bone, but we'll talk about a condition where that no longer is a potential space. If we go look here, you see it's still green. One of the things that the dura mater does, I'll just do that in green, dura mater, it forms these different folds, and these folds in the brain are going to help to kind of, I would say, things like shrink wrap the brain. It's going to help restrict movement of the brain within the skull, so it protects it from movements, and also it does help protect stretch and breaking of blood vessels that we have in the brain. And so this one of the folds that you see here, this is called the falx cerebri. What it does, this actually is found between the two cerebral hemispheres. This is the right cerebral hemisphere. This is the left cerebral hemisphere. So I'm going to show you on a different picture. So this right here, you see, is the falx cerebri. On the right, you'd find the right cerebrum, and on the left of it would be the left cerebrum. What you'll also notice within that falx cerebri, you see all these little blood vessels, these blue. Those are various dural sinuses. So that dura mater is helping to protect those blood vessels from being torn. There are other partitions or folds that are made up of the dura mater. Another one is the falx cerebelli. This here is going to, you find it right there, you find it separating the two cerebellar hemispheres. So you see the left cerebellar hemisphere there. There's actually two. There's a left and a right. So it's kind of partitioning the two cerebellar hemispheres. The tentorium cerebelli, that is separating the cerebral up here from the top from the cerebellar hemispheres. So we're just kind of shrink wrapping parts of the brain, help prevent restricting some of the movement that can happen. Another thing that is formed up of dura mater is the diaphragma celli. And I'm going to have to write that out for you. That's actually found right here, lining this area where the pituitary gland is. It lines what we call the sella turcica, which is kind of this indentation in the sphenoid bone of your skull, which houses your pituitary gland. And so the diaphragma sella just kind of lines that. So the dura mater kind of, I said, partitions the brain, helps prevent restrict movements. It does have large blood vessels in it that eventually split into capillaries that are going to go to the pia mater and eventually to the brain. But that dura mater also in the skull is continuous with the dura mater that we're going to find in the spinal cord. Okay, so the dura mater is the toughest of all of them. Okay, so here this picture is showing you kind of the two layers of the dura mater. The endosteal layer is right next to the skull. The meningeal layer you see down here. Okay, and then here's that dural sinus, which has blood in it. Now the next one we're going to look at is the arachnoid mater. Okay, so this one was the dura mater. The arachnoid mater is going to be that pink. You see the pink. Okay, so let's read this one. So this is arachnoid mater. Now the arachnoid mater is that middle layer. It's very loose, it's cobwebby-like, so it has web-like strands. Associated with the arachnoid mater, we have these structures right here. See these here? Those are referred to as arachnoid granulations. They are actually villi that project into those dural sinuses. And what their job is, they're going to be involved in reabsorption of cerebral spinal fluid. So they reabsorb cerebral spinal fluid because it's something that circulates around the brain and spinal cord, and we have to get rid of waste products and we're going to replenish it. So we reabsorb it, goes back into your venous system. So it reabsorbs CSF from something that we're going to talk about very quickly, from your subarachnoid space and delivers it to the dural sinuses. So I got to talk about some more spaces. I just mentioned the one right there. So first one I wanted to mention is what I just said, the subarachnoid space. The subarachnoid space, you see all of this in here, between all the cobwebs. So you see all the cobwebs? This right in here is the subarachnoid space. So where it's going, this line is referring to the subarachnoid space. So subarachnoid space is right there. It's called subarachnoid space because it's underneath, beneath the arachnoid mater. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to put subarachnoid space here. That is a real life space filled with cerebral spinal fluid. But we have another space that is above the arachnoid mater. It's between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, and that is called the subdural space because it's underneath the dura mater. That is a potential space that should not exist under normal conditions. So on this picture, kind of where you see kind of the lilac color, that is supposed to represent that subdural space. Again, because of the pressure of the cerebral spinal fluid, the arachnoid mater and the dura mater are right next to each other. We don't really have a space there. So subdural space is potential space between the dura and the arachnoid mater. Now the last one that we have is where you see the red. That is the pia mater. That is attached, in this case, to the brain, the surface of the brain. It helps with, one of the things it does is it has capillaries associated with it, help nourish the brain, help support the capillaries. It is impermeable to fluid because it encloses the CSF that lies between this and the arachnoid mater. there is a little space between blood vessels and pia mater that helps serve some sort of lymphatic system for the brain. And another thing it does is it joins with ependymal cells to form the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus produces CSF, and you're going to see that in a subsequent recording. So pia mater has different functions, okay? And we're going to actually look at some more of them a little bit later. Now what about, come back here. So here's a different picture so you can see it again, so you can appreciate the subarachnoid space. So here's the subarachnoid space. Here's all the arachnoid matter, look like webs, little cobwebs. Dura mater, arachnoid matter, pia mater. And you notice where you have the epidural space, subdural space. I really don't see any spaces there because they're potential spaces. Subarachnoid space has CSF in it. Now, we do have meninges associated with the spinal cord. So you still have a dura mater, arachnoid matter, pia mater. And we got to talk about these spaces like we did when we did the cranial meninges. Okay, so, but before I do that, I do want to mention those potential spaces again, and where conditions where now they're actual spaces. So there are conditions called epidural and subdural hematoma. The epidural hematoma and subdural hematoma will have similar consequences in which you have compression of the brain, in this case what you're seeing here within the brain, and the reason is that the skull is not going to be able to be movable, but if you have an accumulation of blood in one of these spaces, the epidural space or the subdural space can't go out, so it moves in, and so it starts to compress the brain and can affect functioning of the brain. So epidural hematoma. Here you have bleeding in the epidural space. So it's that space between the dura mater and the skull. So it's bleeding within the epidural space. This is typically resulting from a tear in an artery, and arteries are under high pressure. So if there's a tear in an artery, there will be an accumulation of blood fairly quickly. So these people can go from being lucid to unconscious very, very quickly. Often it could be because of an injury, trauma. It could be because of illness too. So that would be where you can have like an epidural hematoma. Now the subdural hematoma is you have bleeding in the space between the dura mater and instead of the brain itself, but it's between the dura mater and the arachnoid matter. So it's within that subdural space. This is typically because of tears in veins, which are under lower pressure. So the blood accumulation may take place over a period of time. So you might not have someone immediately go from being lucid to unconscious, so it just could be something that takes place over a period of time. Often with the tears of the veins, because the veins are kind of crossing across that subdural space and they get torn. It could be, this is a consequence what you see with shaken baby syndrome. It can be seen in cerebral atrophy, where you can have cerebral atrophy in elderly people, where the brain starts to shrink and starts to pull on the, increases the length of the veins that are kind of bridging, and it can tear them. It also, cerebral atrophy can be you can see that in alcoholics too. This, because I had mentioned this lower pressure, this has a slower onset. So people start complaining of a headache, then it leads to confusion, and then eventually could lead to some more serious consequences. So these are just some examples where now you've actually have a space when you shouldn't have. So actually what I'm going to do is great time to take a pause. I'm going to do a part B to this recording where I'm going to look at the spinal meninges because it's a great time to review what we've already talked about and throw in some pictures of some lab models too.